really pleased to have him today. So before I get into the presentation, can I see a show of hands of anybody who maybe invests with the Monem mutual funds? Anybody? Okay, so definitely. First, I would like to talk about why, I feel so passionately about Islamic finance. And it's actually a very personal story. So, my mother, she passed away, but her best friend had called me one day, it was maybe 10 years ago, and she wanted to talk to me about retirement because she knew I worked in the finance industry. And we talked about, how much money she had saved up. And so she said that she had Social Security coming, and it was roughly around $800. And we talked about some of her expenses. And her major expenses were a condo association. Alhamdulillah, she owned her home, but her condo association fees were $400, half of what she's actually getting in every month. And I just really felt the pain for this Muslim woman who's been Muslim for over half her life, 45, 50 years. And she's never been able to take advantage of investing so she can have a kind of safe and secure retirement. And it's because there wasn't really options, right? There wasn't really Sharia compliant options 40 years ago when she was working. And on top of that, we didn't have scholars who kind of were able to develop rukhsas for it. She would have other investment options. But alhamdulillah, fast forward, today we're almost living in the best of both worlds. We have a company like Monem Mutual Fund that has a 30-year track record. And when you look at the Monem Mutual Fund, it is, alhamdulillah, we're going to get into the performance. It's pretty good performance, but it really set the standard with what it means to be a Sharia-compliant mutual fund. IOFI, which is the kind of largest regulatory agency for Islamic finance institutions in the world, they almost copied our standards because our standards were created on what it means to do Sharia screening for stocks before IOFI was in existence. So this is something that I really feel passionately that we all can really take from. And one of the things I also want to encourage, and we're going to jump right into the presentation. I want to encourage everyone to take away one thing. Like, this is going to be a very good, very educational seminar, but I'm asking you, I'm encouraging you to take away one thing that you can do. One thing that you can do to improve your financial future, not only for yourself, but for your family. So, alhamdulillah, that was my spiel. Now we're going to talk about year-end tax advantage programs. So the first thing I want to say is that we're talking about investments. So investments always mean that there's going to be risk associated with it. And there's never a guarantee of return, and in some cases you can possibly lose principal. So this is the lineup for today. We're going to talk about review, halal and haram. We're going to talk about asset allocations, qualified accounts, individual retirement accounts, employer plans, 401k plans. We're going to talk about educational savings account, and then we're going to talk about donations, DAF, and endowments. So halal and haram. So when you think of how we operate our fund, so there are numerous equities in the market, and so we have a computer program that kind of brings in all the equities, and we kind of screen them out. The first screen is anything that that their main business is haram. Exploitative media, alcohol, weapons manufacturing, so on and so forth. And so that's the kind of easy screen. You can kind of tell that Anheuser-Busch is not a company that we want to invest in. The second screen is we actually look at financial criteria. Financial criteria is like, what is the total debt to the value of the company? What portion of the company has haram income, right? Because when you try to look at equities, if you try to look at a company that says it has no haram income, there'll be very limited stocks. I remember we were talking to a portfolio manager, and they said if you wanted to be completely pure, you would have 2 companies to invest in, right? And so just to give you an example of how that works, if their main line of business is something that is not approved based on our religion, we won't invest in. But when you look at a company like, let's take a company that's close to all of our hearts here in Texas, like Southwest. So Southwest, what's their main line of business? Airline, travel, taking people from point A to point B. There's no problem with that in terms of the Sharia. But they also sell alcohol in their flights, right? And so we have to do that due diligence, and we don't invest in Southwest for other reasons, but we have to do that due diligence to say what portion of their income comes from these alcohol sales on planes. And so if it's under 5%, then that's a company that's still allowable for us to invest in. But right now, when you look at the companies that we invest in, the rate is almost around 1% of incomes that, that are haram. And also to piggyback off that, we also have a purification calculator on our website. And so you can go in and put in how many shares you have, and they'll tell you how much money you have to purify to give to a non-Islamic charity. So we talked about halal and haram. So now we're going to go into asset allocation. So one of the things of our asset allocation is that you want to have a balanced portfolio, right? We have 4 funds in a Monem mutual fund family. The oldest fund is our Monem income fund, and all these funds have different objectives. This is to provide a steady stream of income for our shareholders. Our second oldest fund is called the Monem Growth Fund. So this is our largest fund, and it's for capital appreciation. The third one is because you want to diversify in many different ways. So one way to diversify is the U.S. equities or U.S. companies, as well as companies in the developing world. So we started the Monem Developing World Fund. So the Monem Developing World is say if the U.S. Economy is kind of sluggish, there might be a lot of opportunities in the developing world to take advantage of. Our fourth fund is one that I'm really excited about, but it's called the Monem Participation Fund because this one is not common as of yet in our country. So it's a fund that's based off capital preservation. So it's a fund if you are close to needing resources, to say if it's an organization like a masjid and they were building and you don't want your capital to be at risk in the market, the participation fund invests in sukuks or Islamic certificates, which are similar to bonds. And so it's relatively safe, and it's a way to preserve your capital, especially if you need it in a short time period. And so having these 4 funds really allows us to offer some asset allocations for our customers. And to that point, we have on our website a tool that's called the Monem Fund Selector, right? Because we understand as customers, you're like, okay, 4 funds, like how do I decide how much to put in each fund? And so the Monem Selector will actually give you a short quiz. It will talk about your risk tolerance. It will talk about the time horizon that you have for investment. These are all decisions that are very, very important in terms of to know where you should park your money. And so after you answer those 8 questions, they'll kind of give you a sample asset allocation that you could follow. And so what I would suggest, if you actually go to the Monem Fund Selector and you go through the questions, after you do it, give me a call. My business card is out here. I'm the regional manager for this area, so I want to be here as a resource for the community. And we can talk through the quiz, we can talk about it, make sure that you understand all the questions because we really want you to have an asset allocation that you feel comfortable with. The next slide, we're going to talk about some of the qualified investments account. So the first account we're going to talk about is traditional IRA. So IRA stands for Individual Retirement Account. And so this account is a tax advantage account. The money that you put into this account is tax deductible. It grows tax free. And when you take it out at the age of retirement, you can take it, you're going to be taxed on when the money comes out. And so it's a $6,000 contribution and there's a $1,000 catch out. In addition to the IRA, there's what we call a Roth IRA. So the difference between the traditional and the Roth, the money that you put in is tax deductible in the traditional, but the money that you put in the Roth is after taxes. So when you put in the Roth, is the money after taxes. It grows tax-free, and then when you take it out at retirement, then you can take it out without any taxes on it. And even if this account If you have to if you pass away and you pass it on to your children, when they take it out, there will be no taxes on it. So it's a really advantageous plan that they have. So the next one is that we want to talk about some of the employer plans. A 401k, that's the common plan in almost corporate America. And also the 403b is another common plan when you work for government or academic institutions. So the employer sets these limits for these plans, but they also offer matching. The employer will generally pay the expenses, and there is a tax-deductible contribution up to $19,000. So the next slide, I think we're going to talk about educational savings account. So in addition to saving for your retirement, one of the things that we want to encourage is saving for the next generation's education. One of the quotes that Malcolm says, that education is a passport to your future. For tomorrow is going to be taken by the people who prepare for it today. So an educational savings account is for higher education or primary education. Even for Islamic schools now, it can be used. There's a $2,000 contribution limit, and there's also income limits in order who qualifies for that. So the income limits it phases out between $190,000 and $220,000. This money must be distributed by the age of 30, but you can open one for each of your children and put $2,000 in. So now we're going to talk about some of those actual tax saving strategies and kind of efficient charitable donations. And so I'm going to bring up our Executive Vice President, Monem, Salam.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. In the name of Allah, all praise is due to Allah, present blessing be upon His Messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we were talking, Hood just mentioned a little bit about the tax saving strategies that were there. And one of the things that I wanted to point out in this slide was that, you might have, obviously, none of you raised their hand when they said you had the amount of funds, so you probably have some investments that are out there. So before the year end is done, there's a couple of things that we wanted to talk about for you to take a look at. Number one is the aspect of asking the question to yourself before the year end is over. Are your investments that you have right now in something that's halal? And in this regard, I think all the other accounts that he talked about, Brother Hood talked about, the one thing to keep in mind is that if you have choice, then you can choose to make your accounts halal. And so that's really the key point we wanted to kind of mention, is that if you don't have any choices in the accounts that you have, whether you have an IRA or a Roth IRA or a 401k, then think about strategies you can use to be able to get that choice in your accounts. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we've had a pretty big run-up in the market. And so you might have started off the year, maybe last year, with a really nice asset allocation, but it's going to be every year you should look at it and say, am I comfortable with having this much in growth, this much in income, this much in developing world, those type of things. So it's very important to be able to take a look at that before the end of the year, so that you can make different strategies going forward. And then on the qualified accounts, the one thing that I wanted to kind of highlight also, again, choice is going to allow you to be able to choose what's halal, right? But if you take, for example, the individual retirement account, the traditional IRA, if you put money away for yourself and for your spouse, as long as you're not investing in a 401k already, you can actually immediately take tax benefits for this year. And that's why we wanted to talk about it before the year end. So if you put away $6,000, it reduces your adjusted gross income by that $6,000. And if you put $6,000 for your spouse, then again, another $6,000, you could reduce it. If you're age 50 and above, you can put an additional $1,000 into that account. Okay? And then from there, once you put it in, whether you open that up with us or you open it up with anybody else, again, you're going to have the choice, or some institutions allow you the choice to be able to choose what you want to do. If you open up in a bank, they're only going to give you limited options. But if you open it up with us or with Fidelity or Schwab, you can choose, again, to choose our funds or anything else that's out there that would be halal. Can you go to the 401k slide one? The other thing that I wanted to mention is that in 401ks, if you're employed, then most likely you have one. But it might not necessarily be something that a company matches. Now, if you're working for a large company, most likely a company will match for every dollar you put in. For example, they'll put in $1 or they'll put in 50 cents or something along those lines. But majority of the companies in the US are not the large ones. They're the mom and pop operations or small, medium-sized businesses, and they don't offer a 401k. Okay? Or if they offer a 401k, they might not match with whatever you're putting in. So if that's the case, if they don't offer a 401k, or if they don't match whatever contribution you're making, then you should seriously think about opening up a traditional IRA rather than a 401k. And the reason again is why? Because you have choice. In a 401k, the employer is the one who's going to choose what investments you have an option for choosing. And if and if there's, obviously they're not going to be having the halal haram in mind, so you might not have that choice to be able to make. If they're not matching you, or if they don't offer one, then the traditional IRA offers the same benefits to you. Okay, that's one thing. The second thing is, if let's supposing you have an employer, they do have a 401k, they do match, and so then you say, well, now what do I do if I have my investments in there? So a lot of companies like Fidelity and Vanguard and other providers of the 401ks have an option called a brokerage option within your 401k. So Fidelity is called BrokerLink, Vanguard it's called Choice, or whatever the names are that they have. Now you can actually, once your money is in the 401k, through the 401k you can open up a brokerage account. And once you open up the brokerage account, you can transfer the money from your 401k into the 401k brokerage, and then you can do whatever you want with it to make your investments halal. Okay, so that's one of the things you can do to make sure. Again, the choice is the key whenever we're talking about this. Now, last thing that I wanted to mention in regards to the education account is that $2,000. You might be thinking to yourself, well, that's really not a lot of money per year per child. But there's two things to keep in mind. If you're very young and your child is just born or they're very young, the $2,000 over an 18-year period is the principal, right? Is going to be about $36,000. That's not including the growth. And the average tuition in Texas right now for just the tuition and the books and everything for a 4-year college like UT Austin is going to be about $36,000. So you can still be able to make it. Other than that, what you can also do is when you open up a Roth IRA, right, because they have the same income limits, it's basically the same kind of growth, those type of things. When you open up a Roth IRA, the Roth IRA can be used for education for anybody in your immediate family. So you can open up a Roth for your children, for yourself and for your spouse, and then $2,000 each for your children, and now you can begin to significantly save money if you so choose to be able to do that. So that's some of the different strategies immediately that you can think about whenever it comes to these kind of different taxable or non-taxable accounts. Are there any questions before I move on to the charitable side of this? Any questions? Regarding? Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about the charitable side. So I'm going to first talk about the donor advice fund. And what we do at the end of every year for a lot of the clients is what's called tax loss harvesting. Tax loss harvesting basically means that in any portfolio you're going to have some winners and you're going to have some losers. And throughout the year you might have basically sold some stock, and that stock that you sold is going to have roughly between a 15 and 18% capital gain tax. So what a lot of people do is they will sell some of their ones that they've lost money on, and the loss is going to offset the gain, dollar for dollar. Okay, so for example, if you had a $10,000 gain for 1 year, as an example, you're probably going to end up paying $1,800 in taxes in April when you file your taxes. However, if you have $10,000 worth of losses, then you can sell that, and then you won't have to pay any taxes whatsoever. Okay, so that's one strategy. The other strategy is what we on the right hand side, which I'll get to a little bit later. But I wanted to talk about a donor advice fund. A donor advice fund is basically a fund which is a charitable organization. So it is a 501c3. So once you put your money, take your stock that you have that's, let's say, highly appreciated, you can put it into the donor advice fund. You can open up an account open up a donor advised fund, you take the stock that you have highly appreciated, and then you move it into the donor advised fund, you're going to get an immediate charitable deduction. Okay, an immediate charitable deduction. And then what's going to happen is, once you've done that, now you have time to be able to decide what charity you want to give to. So you can do this next year, you can do the year after that, the year after that. And there's two things that make this fund what's called a donor advised fund, donor advised. Number one is that once you put the money in there, you can advise the charity, this donor advised fund, where you want to make your investments. And the second thing you can advise, quote unquote, advise your this charity fund is you can say what other charities you want to be able to give that money to. But again, the advantage of it is that you don't have to do it right away. Now, what this strategy does is basically for highly appreciated assets. Let's supposing you're working for a company, and it's a private company. Now they're going to go public, and you've been working with it for a long time. You're going to have highly appreciated assets. Let's supposing 5 years ago you bought Nvidia. Everybody knows Nvidia. Or let's supposing you bought Tesla when it first came out. Those have gone up in value quite a bit, and you have a large gain. No matter when you sell it, now or later, or whatever it is, there is going to be a taxable gain for you. And it's going to be about 18% on the tax you're going to pay. This is a strategy you can use to be able to save those taxes. Now, how you do that is what I've mentioned on the right-hand side. Okay, so this is basically an example. So assuming that on a yearly basis, alhamdulillah, that you give $50,000 worth of donations. Okay, that's just an assumption to keep the math simple. Now, you also, let's assume that you did buy something, let's say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and you bought it for $10,000, and now it's worth $50,000. Okay, so normally you make cash donations of 50, and you have a highly appreciated asset that's worth 50 as well. One thing you can do is continue to make those cash donations of the 50,000, and you continue to grow that whatever highly appreciated asset is to be able to do that. But what I'm trying to explain is how do you save taxes and being able to do that. Number one is what you do is you take the $50,000 in gains that you have, and you donate that directly either to a charity like a masjid, or you put it into a donor advised fund. You're going to get the benefit of the entire $50,000 donation. Now, because the charity doesn't pay taxes, when they sell it, they're not going to realize a gain. Okay? Now, the cash that you normally use to give to the charities, that you have the $50,000, take that money, and you're welcome to give that away also. Or if you don't want to lose your investment, and if you like the investment that you have, then take that $50,000 and buy back whatever investment that you have. And what you've done then is you've basically saved the taxes on the donation. You've kept your investment the same amount, but you've raised your cost basis so that, let's say 2-3 years from now, when it goes up even higher, you'll have less taxes to pay, or you can make the same strategy and you won't have to pay taxes at that time also. Okay, so that's kind of the strategy that I wanted to mention. Now, you can do this with any charity, so you don't have to have a donor advised fund. You can actually, look at, for example, if the masjid has, or any charity that has a brokerage account, or if you have funds with us, if you have a mutual fund account, you can easily just go ahead and donate that directly to the charity itself. Right? The advantage of the donor advised fund is that you can choose, you don't have to make the decision right away. You can wait for a period of time. The second thing that the donor advised fund allows you to do is kind of like thinking about it as a very inexpensive way of doing a private foundation. And the reason why is because you can keep the money in there, you can let it grow. Let's supposing every year you put a certain amount of money. Inshallah, when you get older and there's a significant amount of money, you can think about, and when people actually do this, is they have, basically, they get their family together, their children together, and they say, okay, what charity do we want to give to this year? And whatever the gains are for that year in that fund, you can decide you want to give in regards to that also. The other thing you can do is if you pass away, then that money is still in that fund. The kids can decide to be able to give, to different charities, and that could become like a sadaqah jariyah for you. Okay? The last thing that I wanted to mention is that when you have the IRA, right? Let's supposing you followed our advice and beginning now for the next 20 or 30 years, you decided you were going to put either into an IRA or a Roth IRA or even into a 401k, right? Once you actually reach a certain age, which is 72 and a half, right? In a traditional IRA, you're forced to take money out of the account. It's the IRS mandated that you have to do it. Right? But a lot of people that we know of, our shareholders, and a lot of people we know, they work longer than that, or they don't need the money much longer. Okay? But they still have to take the money out, and it's still going to be taxed. And that's why the IRS makes you do it, so that they can collect on the taxes. So one strategy you can do is up to $100,000 of the RMD, this is called required minimum distribution. You can take out of your IRA and directly move it into a charitable account. Once you do that, there's no taxable consequence to your income, and your your adjusted gross income doesn't change. So that's the benefit of being able to do that. So you'll be able to save on whatever taxes that you want to. Now, I put up examples of $50,000, $100,000, those type of things, and you can do it for as little as $2,000, $3,000. That's the dollars don't matter. It's more a matter. I just wanted to throw up an example to be able to give you to be able to do that. Okay, now I know this is a little complicated, so I'm happy to take any questions for if there's any clarifications that anybody needs to make. You know, if you can raise your hand and say, I'm totally lost, I have no idea what you're talking about, or anything like that. Oh, go ahead.
The charity, is there some restrictions on the charity organization? Does it need to be registered in the U.S.?
It does.
Does it need to have presence in the U.S.?
Yes, it does need to be. Yes, it does need to be registered in the U.S. because the IRS wants to know where you gave the money. Okay. Now, a lot of people, what they want to also do is they, I really want to be able to give to my family members back home. That's not possible with what I'm talking about. If you really are concerned about that, mashallah, just pay the taxes and just give them the money, or just take it out of cash, or do whatever. This strategy is specifically for 501c3 organizations. Right? Only criteria is that they have to have a brokerage account and or a mutual fund account, so you have a place to land those assets that you're moving over. And if the masjid doesn't have one, which I know ISGH does, but if they didn't, or you have another charitable organization that doesn't have one, then you can advise them to open it. Because I can tell you in the Muslim community right now, there are, mashallah, a lot of people around the country that have very, very highly appreciated assets. So it's a very good strategy, even if you're on the board or of another charity that you're involved with, they don't have one. It's a great way to be able to raise an additional amount of money that is coming from a different wallet share than you would from a regular cash donation or a credit card donation or something like that. Okay? Anybody else? Yes?
So you said that for traditional IRA, you have to withdraw the money at 72?
Correct.
What about the Roth?
Okay, so the question was is that, I mentioned that in the traditional IRA, you have to withdraw the money by when you turn 72 and a half. And the question was, is that what about a Roth? So in the Roth IRA, you don't have to take the money out.
But you already pay the taxes.
Because you already paid the tax on it. So it's like either you pay taxes now and you save later, or you save taxes now and you pay later. And there's no right formula for when to use what, right? Well, there's one formula, which is that if you're making over $190,000, if you're filing jointly, then you're not allowed to invest in a Roth. Okay, so that's one way. But if you make less than that, the only thing that I would tell you is if you're fairly young, right, you're probably in the lower tax bracket, right? So putting your money in a traditional IRA and saving, let's say, 20% taxes, it's not going to benefit you. Because later on in your life, you're probably also going to be in a lower tax bracket. So there's no delta there, right? But if you're, later on, so invest in a Roth. And the money will grow and it'll have a lot more time frame to be able to grow for you. If you're later on, if you're in the, above, let's say 25% tax bracket, above 25, and you were like 30 or 39, whatever it is, then you want to save the taxes now. Because most likely in retirement, if you're not working and you take an income, it's going to be less than the 39% you're paying now. So you want to think about those things when you're thinking about, do I do a Roth or do I do a tradition?
Is it just one-time choice, or you can change it?
Oh, you can change whenever you want. So the question was, is it a one-time choice, or you can you change it? And you can change whenever you want. So 1 year you can do a Roth, and 1 year you can do a tradition. And the one thing to keep in mind, if you have a 401k, you cannot do a tradition. Okay, so but you can, if you have a 401k, but your spouse doesn't work, then they can open a traditional. Okay, you don't have to put, it's not an all or none. You don't have to put 6,000 or nothing. You can put a little bit. You can put 3,000 into a traditional and 3,000 into a Roth. So you can do a combination of both as well. It just kind of really depends on your tax situation and what you really want to do with that money later on down the road. Was there a question back there also? Yes.
Is the self-directed account similar to the brokerage account? Like when you have like self-directed account, is it same as brokerage account? You say when you ask Fidelity or
Yeah, right. So the question is that is the self-directed account the same as a brokerage account that I was mentioning earlier? So yes, if you have a 401k at Fidelity, for example, yes, it is called a self-directed.
and the other question is, when you ask for your money to be self-directed, they tell you you can do that only for your portion, not for the other portion. So
That's true.
can you
Can I what?
Yeah. Can you explain on that?
Sure. So the question was that when you have that self-directed, most likely the 401k provider is going to tell you you can only put a certain percentage amount into the self-directed.
Your percentage, your money, not their money.
Oh, that's different rules for different ones. Normally what they do, not always, but normally what they do is they'll just give you a percentage of how much you can put in. The other one, it doesn't. So I'll back up. So let's start there first, and I'll come back to what you're saying, because there is a scenario where that happens. So the first one, then they might say, you know what, you can only put up to 50%, or you can only put up to 90% of the money that's in your 401k into the self-directed side. So what I would recommend, again, because of choice, as maximum as you can do, go ahead and do that. Now, what the brother also mentioned is that sometimes they say you can put your portion, but the company's match portion you have to keep in the regular part of the 401k. Okay, different ones might have different rules. Here's what I've seen, however, from my experience, and that is that if your company has a match, but there's a vesting schedule, right? Everybody know what a vesting schedule is? So, for example, let's supposing they match you up to 5% of your income. But they might tell you that you're not going to have this money until you've worked for the company for 3 or 4 years, for example. That's called a vesting schedule. So that technically money, that employer money that they put into your account, even though it's in your account, it's not really your money. So they might tell you, yes, you're not allowed to put it into self-directed. We want you to keep it into the choices that we've given you. So that's really the only example that I've seen where they've kind of restricted their portion of it, but it might be different for different companies that I just haven't seen. So you just look into that. Yes, ma'am.
But the very first one strategy you talked about saving taxes was I've gained 10,000 and I've lost 10 from this other stock and I'm going to sell this. Is there a limit to how much you can actually write off on the?
Not if you're offsetting the gains and losses. So, for example, let's suppose that throughout the year you did really well and you kept you had, first of all, let me back up a little bit. It has to be you're buying and selling, and you may have a gain of let's say like as in $10,000, right? Even if it's $100,000, as long as you can show a loss of the same amount, you can offset it. There's no limit to it. Okay, now. The limit is there, and I'm not an attorney guy, right? So you have to talk to, an accountant or a CPA. But what you can do is, if you're supposing you have a $100,000 loss, but you have no gains, then what you can do is up to $3,000 for your next year, you can take a tax write-off. But the $97,000 can carry forward, and let's supposing you have a gain next year, you can offset it by that as well. So the losses do carry forward. The gains do not. The gains the IRS wants you to pay for right away, right? So if it's long term, it's like 18%. If it's short term, it's 28%. Okay. Anybody else?
To your knowledge, do you think there are like stocks like 100% of that? Like you mentioned that there are conditions, right? So for example, the 5% on the debt ratio,
Yeah.
the 30% on the income ratio,
Yeah.
and so forth. Do you think that there are like stocks like 100% of that?
90% or 100%?
100%.
So the question is that do I think that because of the stocks that we buy in the market, they have some ratio, there might be some investments that they have in interest. And so are there any companies out there that you can buy that would be 100%, meaning there's 0% of anything that would be haram in it? That's the question. So there's two answers to that. Number one is that if you look globally, the answer is yes. Okay, so for example, in countries like Malaysia, or in their stock market, or in the stock market of Dubai or Turkey, those type of things, you can buy stocks of companies that are Islamic. Let's call that Islamic for now, right? Meaning that all of their transactions that they do, whether it be in the bank account that they have, if they're offering that they're doing it in sukuk, if they have any insurance, it's takaful, everything like that, all that's going to be done in an Islamic way. Okay? Now you come to the US or Europe or other developed market, right? And that, for lack of a not to get complicated, but the answer is no. Okay? However, I will say that the idea here is the scholars have come up with something. If you use these criteria, the one that Brotherhood went over, right, then you've made your investments halal. Now, in the halal, you can find makruh, you can find, all of these different categories of what halal would be. But it is halal, okay? And then from there is going to be some tainted income, and that's where the purification comes in.
One school of thought.
Yeah, sure. That's right.
There are others who say no.
Yes, that's correct. So if there's a school of thought that says that it's not allowed, then usually it's basically you can't invest in the market at all. Yeah. So it's either
That's
no.
just one part of the-
Yes, it's either no, or if it's yes, then these are the kind of criteria for it. And yes, there are people who say that it's completely not allowed. Yes, brother.
Two questions. Do all 401k offer a brokerage option?
No. The question was, do all 401ks offer a brokerage option? The answer is no.
Second question is Amana Mutual Fund all 100% halal?
Okay, that was a trick question that I just answered for this guy, this brother, sorry. So let me back up to the 401k because I have to make a qualifier anyway, and then I'll go back to the Amana Mutual Fund. Okay. On the 401k, I told you that do all 401ks offer a brokerage option or self-directed? The answer is no. However, we have successfully worked with the employees to get the 401k a self-directed option. So if your company doesn't have one, we can help you at least try to get it in there. It doesn't always work, but it's worth the shot. Okay? So come afterwards and we can talk about that a little bit further.
You don't have perks for both private and public companies?
Sorry?
You can help both private and public companies?
Yes. The question was, can I help both private and public? And the answer is yes. Obviously, the private ones, if the smaller the company, the easier it's going to be, right? However, that being said, we have helped Microsoft, FedEx, and Google Intel actually put the brokerage option or self-directed option within their 401k. So it can work. You kind of work with other groups within the company to kind of lobby the 401k department to do that. Okay, now I'll come back to your question, right? And the question is that is the Amana funds 100% halal? And so that's the reason why I mentioned that, okay, then what does that mean? Or I think I've thought about it, is again, we have a Sharia opinion that says, and every year, every quarter, we get this opinion updated by our Sharia scholars that says, yes, our portfolio is halal. Okay? Now, that being said, again, in there, then you could have, what is the criteria for halal is what Hood went over earlier. So do we have companies or is our funds in a certain way, ones that have absolutely no debt, absolutely no cash, absolutely no haram? This is not possible in the US, right? I mean, how did this criteria come about? Let me give you an example. So back in 1984, when the funds first started, right, we did kind of convene like a scholarly meeting and said, what do we do in this situation? So one of the scholars said, I really don't like debt, and so I don't want any company that we have in the portfolio that has any debt on it. So we went back and we did our research, came back and said, that's good. There's 50 companies in the market right now that have no debt on their balance sheet. And you can find those right now too. There's quite a few companies that do that. Another scholar said, yeah, debt is really good, but I don't want any companies with any cash on their balance sheet because cash will be put into an interest-bearing account, and the interest-bearing account obviously will give you interest. That's not allowed either. So how many companies do you think that are in the market that have no cash and no debt? Zero. So if you want to invest, you have to come up with a criteria that's going to be a little bit more adjustable. So that's why they kind of they kind of thought through it, and then they raised it up to that level of 33%. Now, our goal is not to buy 32.9 every single time. Our goal is trying to get to zero as much as zero as possible. We're going to do that, and then look at, for diversification purposes, we might go up to 1%, 2%, 3%, all the way up to 33%. Right? So the average debt, for example, just to give you an idea, the average debt to market cap on our growth fund is about 6.5%. It's not 32.9, 6.5%. And we had to do that for diversification purposes. So that's kind of giving you kind of just a little background on where this kind of came from. If you're really interested, I mean, I am obviously. So if you are, there's a really good book by Justice Muhammad Taqi Uthmani. Known as Introduction to Islamic Finance. It's a very basic, but it's really, really good. In chapter 12 of that book, he actually talks about specifically stocks and investments in them and those type of things. So maybe that'll be something you'd want to do. Okay? Yes?
So one option a lot of people outside of the stock market are exploring is real estate investment funds, which is usually an opportunity for when you don't have to deal with the debt and the interest or anything like that. Do you have anything like that in the market?
And so in a matter right now, so there's two things here, right? Number one is generally investing in real estate. Number two is creating a private real estate fund that invests in real estate. And the other one is looking for companies in the stock market that invest in real estate. Okay. So in the first one, we don't have one, but you can do it privately if you wanted to, right? On the second one, there are funds that are available, but they're all private, and so it's all on word of mouth. We don't offer it. In the market, right, there are real estate investment trusts that are publicly traded, right, that meet the criteria that we talked about earlier. Okay, we don't have a fund right now, but we are exploring having that type of a fund. So, inshallah, sometime next year, hopefully, if everything goes well, we will have a fund, our fifth fund, that will be investing not in real estate directly, but in real estate investment trust. One of the things that we've always done is that all of our funds, right? We have about $5.5 billion in all of our four funds. Okay. Any day that the market is open, right? Every single shareholder that we have, if they wanted their money back, we can liquidate the entire portfolio and give it back to them. That's one of the criteria that we've always had. If we put it into private real estate, that wouldn't be able to happen, right? So even when we do a fund like a real estate fund, we have to make it in liquid companies in the market, so that our same criteria holds too. That whenever you need the money, for whatever you need the money for, we're going to be able to give it to you within a day. Okay?
So the real estate fund that the brother mentioned, is it like, for example, like the Vanguard real estate or something like that?
Yeah, it's very similar. So the question was, is that the real estate fund that I talked about, is it like the other Vanguard real estate fund or something like that?
So when you invest on these, are they having like these kind of things, the debt ratio, the income?
In Amana or in Vanguard?
No, the Vanguard.
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. No, the question is, are they like a stock company or that you can, I don't know how to mention. Can they, for example, they have the same issue with, like, for example, the debt ratio, or they are real estate, so that doesn't matter these criteria.
Yeah. So the question was, is that do they? Let me rephrase the question and tell me if I misunderstood. So basically, what you're asking me is that, for example, if I take a Vanguard real estate fund, do they have some criteria that they have to be able to limit the amount of debt or what the business of the real estate is and that type of thing? Is that the question? Yeah. Okay. The answer is no. Right?
So that's similar to any other public company?
From Vanguard, yes. When we're coming up with our fund, that's why we're taking our time to be able to come up with a fund, is that we want to make sure that it meets the criteria. So for example, we're even looking at like different types of, I'll just give you one example. So we're looking at data storage real estate companies, right? The big warehouses that store data from the cloud. There are warehouses that actually you can buy companies of that own the properties, right? But there are some companies whose majority of their data that's stored is from a bank rather than from any other company. So we have to go back to our Sharia scholars and say, is this going to be allowed or not allowed? So we're going back and forth to making sure as much as we can to make sure that the investments that we make in that real estate fund is going to be something that's allowed. The other thing that happens is you can go to a real estate like a Vanguard and that type of thing, and you can go through, let's suppose that they own 10 companies in there, right? And you can look at each of their debt to market cap criteria, and you might find that every single one of them is below whatever the threshold is, okay? However, what we've discovered in our process right now of doing this, that the real estate companies have a lot of what's called off-balance sheet debt. Off-balance sheet means they don't have to report it on their balance sheet because they have either a joint venture or something like that. That's not reported, or that like Vanguard would not care about that. We do care about it. So that is a little bit different from that perspective. I didn't mean to get too detailed, but I just wanted to give an example of that. There's one more slide that one more topic I wanted to talk about. So if there's any other questions before I move on. Okay, so the one last thing that I wanted to talk about really quickly when it comes to is you can go back. One last thing I wanted to talk about, and then I'll turn it over to Hood to talk a little bit further about the amount of funds. We're talking about year end, what you can do, before the year end when it comes to investments. One of the things that I would tell you is absolutely right. Make sure that you have at least minimum you have a will, right? That you've written for yourself, and that will also with that make an inventory of where all of your accounts are, assets are, and those type of things. You will be surprised at how many times I've come across families where the husband passes away or the father passes away, and the family has no idea where all the assets are. So they spend the next, even while they're grieving, they have to spend the next 2-3 months just trying to gather all the data, forget about whether they have a will or not, or those type of things. So what I would recommend, sincerely, is that before the end of the year, make a commitment to be able to write yourself a will, right? You might need something more complicated, that can wait, inshallah, for the trust, but at least do that, and make an inventory of where all of your different accounts are. I have a 401k, I have this account at Fidelity, whatever it is that you have, make an inventory of it and put it somewhere that everybody knows about, so that it makes it easier on your family whenever, not if you pass away, right? When you pass away, it'll make it easier on your family to be able to do that. That being said, if you already have a will, the one thing you want to do is make sure within this year, right? Because this is a year-end strategy, you want to inshallah make it a habit to do it every year, is to make sure there haven't been any life-changing events that you need to update either your will or your trust, right? What do I mean by life-changing events? If you wrote your will, for example, when you were, let's suppose, married to your first wife, you ended up getting a divorce, or your first husband getting a divorce, and you don't change your will, if you leave it the way it is, when you pass away, everything's going to go to your previous marriage spouse rather than your current one. So all of these different things you have to kind of think about, right? If your children have become of age, for example, of age means in Texas would be 21 years old, right? Maybe you had an account set up for them that was like, for example, for a minor account, you have to change that over to their account, or it's not going to be a valid account. So all of these different things you just kind of be thinking about when you're thinking about the estate planning aspect of it. Okay? Any other questions before I turn it back over to Hood? Yes?
Do you offer these services like wills and...
We do not offer the service of will and trust because that's a lawyer, a different one. We can recommend people to you. We'll give you a list of 4 or 5. You can call them and interview them. However, what we do, is that if you have a will or a trust, we can become the executor on the will, or we can become a corporate trustee on the trust that you have. Okay? So what does that allow you to do? I mean, I recommend to people, they might not listen, but I recommend to people, don't make your spouse, whether it be, or, you're the executor, don't make your best friend the executor, only if you really hate your best friend, or, do it, because it's a lot of work. You have to file with the courts, you have to wait for the court to get back to you, you have to inventory the assets, you have to go back to the court to value them, then you can distribute them. Okay, so it's not like, he's my best friend, I just want to, give him the responsibility. It's a lot of work. And so definitely, the reason why I didn't say, I said spouse was because at the time that they're grieving, for your loss, they're going to have to go through this process. So probably sometimes better for you to do it with a third party, a trustee or an executor, rather than giving it to somebody that is your friend. And if it's your enemy, then go ahead and do it, inshallah. That would be okay. To me, I would do that. Anybody else? Okay, so now I'm going to turn it back over to Hood, and he'll just talk a little bit about, just kind of wrap up with the amana funds a little bit, and then again, if there's any final questions, I will be able to do that. Jazakallah khair. Wassalamu alaikum.
You probably can see why he's the expert. Alhamdulillah. So one of the things I want to talk about is the services that we offer. So when you think about Monem mutual funds, there are several accounts that you can open that we talked about. The first one is for retirement, either the Roth or the traditional IRA. You can open directly. I think we have applications back at this table. You also can go online and fill out an application online. If you need any help, my business cards are back there. I would love to help anyone. In addition to that, we actually do 401k. So if you are self-employed or you're a business owner, we can actually help you set up a 401k for yourself and for your employees. In addition to 401k, we can do other retirement plans, a self-employment IRA or a simple IRA. We have a health savings account now. So a health savings account is a tax-advantaged account that allows you to use the money for health care now and in the future for yourself and your family. We have the educational savings account that we talked about earlier. In addition to that, there's a uniform gift for minors account, which is also known as an UGMA account. And we do brokerage service. So we do brokerage service for individuals as well as masjids. When we were talking about getting that donation, a stock donation, you have to have a brokerage account set up in order to receive it. So that's one of the things that we recommend for every Islamic institution, because you don't want to have a donor that says, hey, I want to give you $100,000, and then you have to go through the process of already setting up a brokerage account versus already having it. We do financial planning. If you have over $100,000 in assets, the financial plan is free. If you have under that, it's $500. One of my colleagues will walk you through the whole financial plan to give you a sense of where you are in terms of retirement. Investment advisory services for people who have assets of over $1 million. We can actually create a custom portfolio for you, and we'll have Monem is the manager of those, and so he can make sure that you have a portfolio that's tailored to your individual or your family needs. And then, like he said, we have the trust services that we set up. And so, I encourage you all to look at our 4 different funds. The Amana Income Fund, the objective of this fund is for income and capital appreciation. The Amana Growth Fund, which is a capital appreciation, high growth fund. The Developing World Fund, capital appreciation and diversity into the developing world, into the developing world markets, and also the participation fund. So let me know if there's any questions, comments, concerns. We have, please take a pen. If you have any more questions, we'll definitely love to hear them. Even if we wrap up here, definitely come up and we can talk to you one-on-one if you have questions, inshallah. Thank you.